Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks for that intro. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friday. I'm ready for the weekend here. Start kicking off the countdown with you all. So really excited to have you here today. Really also excited to be talking about this topic. I think it's a topic that is kind of a lot of people know about. We have this sense that there's something there, but breaking it down and understanding what's going on with gaming and how we could use that specifically in distance learning and what that means for young learners today. So as I turn on to my slides, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to be doing my best to keep an eye on what's going on in the chat here, but it's also quite distracting, so I might miss some interactions here.
That's what I'm here for, Shawn.
Yeah, so exactly. We'll save them till the end if worst case. But
would you like me to ask you questions as they come, or keep them for the end of your presentation?
Let's keep them for the end, and I'll just keep an eye on it. And if I can, swing it, I'll do it.
All right, wonderful. I'll let you know when you have when we're at 15 to 10.
You got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about gaming culture, motivation, student engagement, and of course, anybody who's done any distance learning or distance teaching knows that this is student engagement, motivation, and ultimately community building are really challenging things to do in virtual. It's a truism now, everybody knows that now because of the pandemic. It's the same issues we have for work. Remote work, and how do you maintain community, and the amount of virtual happy hours we've had in the last 2 years, and they're just not the same. And same goes for education. We've can't have happy hours with your students, and even if you could, it wouldn't be the same type of experience you can build in person with relationships. And so the question behooves us to ask ourselves, what does that look like? How can we do that? And, how can we, instead of, a lot of what we see in distance learning classically has been, giving points for participation, 10% of your grade is participation, basically forcing learners to participate instead of designing experiences where they want to participate. And so what we're going to be exploring today is why we should care about that, how we can think about it, what are some frameworks for applying that to distance learning, and hopefully I'll walk away here with some ideas. So without further ado, already got presented. So the starting point here is super broad. I made this slide 3 years ago. And what I love about this slide is that it's still super true, except the pandemic has accelerated a lot of these changes. But what we're seeing is that the world is changing really, really, really rapidly, and any one of these single changes on its own would be massively disruptive in any other time. The rise of Industry 4.0, robotics, automation in factories of production. There's been a lot of talk about the metaverse in the last year, but this has been building up over the last decade. AI is in the news every single day. Cryptocurrencies, but even genetics. And so what's happening is that we're moving towards a world where it's really, really, really hard to predict what's going to be. What's society going to look like in 10 years, in 15 years, in 20 years? And so the question then becomes, what do we do for learners? How do we help them be ready for that world? Knowing specific, historical dates off the top of your head is important, but is really going to allow you to be successful as a citizen. So how do we add to that body of knowledge and give them the skills they need to succeed in this changing world? And this is especially true, and this is from 5 years ago. It's even more true now. But this is from the World Economic Forum, and as we look into the future, we're seeing that they're predicting 65% of kids that are entering primary school right now are going to work in jobs that don't exist yet. and not just like variants of jobs, complete jobs that don't exist. Just look at the gig economy. 15 years ago, it was impossible to imagine, millions of self-employed people working on the time that they wanted, on the job that they wanted, with no boss, for example, for Uber. And, and Uber's one example, but there's, dozens and dozens and dozens of changes that have occurred. Another example of this is, we've been talking a lot about truckers over the last month in Canada. But actually, that's a really interesting job. It's the most prevalent job in North America, 3 million truckers in the US alone. And the pathway towards self-driving electric trucks is just around the corner. And so 3 million people that are going to need to be recycled, upcycled, reskilled into jobs that aren't necessarily the right match for them right now. Because at the same time, there are right now in America 3 million cybersecurity jobs open, and nobody to fill them. And so that's what the workplace is going to look like. Complete upheaval over the space of a decade of types of jobs that are going to cycle in and cycle out. And so we need to be able to help kids engage with that world and have the skills they need to be able to change careers dramatically within the lifespan of their adulthood. And so, the question then for like virtual learning and distance learning is, well, okay, so, oh my God, how do we create that? That seems like a really big challenge. Especially when you combine that with, the motivation crisis that exists right now. And, this is a headline from a year ago in virtual learning. This was in K-12, but we see these types of issues in higher ed all the time. Just look at, participation rates in MOOCs, 10%, 5%, 2% completion rates on these massively open online courses. And the problem isn't that the content isn't interesting. I mean, these MOOCs are, they're run by Stanford and Harvard professors, and they're attended by people who signed up on their own. So why don't they complete them? And the reason they don't complete them is because there's a motivation problem. So how do we solve for that? And while at the same time considering, the type of exit profile we want for these students. And so and then you combine that with the type of kids these are, and we have a real problem. This is a statistic that I bring up a lot because we have a lot of it's older people, older than these kids. And then, I'm talking here 10 to 25-year-olds, older than them. We know some things about their reality, but the mental health issues, the anxiety, the stress, the depression are an all-time high with this generation. And a lot of that is because they don't know, they're faced with a lot of uncertainty in their future. These are kids growing up in a climate crisis. They don't even know if, what humanity is going to be looking like by the time they're adults. Will they be able to have grandchildren? Who knows? When you look at the climate crisis, that's an open question. They've lived through economic turmoil. They've lived through complete change in how we relate to one another through social media in their lifetime. So they're faced with a ton of change upcoming in the workplace, but also as they're growing up. And what that's created is a lot of stress and anxiety. And so the reason I'm bringing this up in the context of the exit profile is because if we want them to be able to navigate the changes ahead, we need to arm them today with the capacity and the desire and the cognition to be able to manage their change right now. And that's not a given. And so the question then is, okay, how do we do that? My thesis here today is that there is a culture of engagement. And, because the response to this is disengaged. That's why depression, that's why chronic loneliness, that's why apathy, that's why demotivation. And actually, there is a whole cultural medium. And, you're seeing me coming here, the title of this talk, but there's a whole cultural medium that is extremely prevalent for these young people. Now I'll go on to make a case that it's the main cultural medium for these people that is all based around engaging and navigating change. And so what's interesting is that the systems we've built to educate them aren't promoting the capacity for them to, navigate change and be engaged, but what they're doing in their spare time does. And so what I'm talking about here is video gaming, and I'm going to be talking about skill development and behavioral intervention, and in that context. But the reality is that whether or not you agree with video games as a cultural medium, they're here to stay, they're prevalent, and there's a lot we can learn from them. So let me just give you a bit of these are American stats. They're very similar in Canada and Quebec. I just don't have as up-to-date ones. So here are the American ones. But let me make a case here for games as the primary culture for these people. And in fact, for all people, there's some pretty surprising stats here. The first one is this guy on the left is the most recognizable fictitious character that exists. You can take any character you can imagine. I don't know, you want to take Harry Potter and stick him next to Mario, you're going to have 100% of people basically will recognize Mario, not necessarily Harry Potter. You can take any franchise you can imagine, Star Wars, and Mario is the most recognized figure in the world. And the reason for that is A, because he's been around for generations, but B, because he's the face of a cultural medium that is extremely prevalent. How prevalent? This is from pre-pandemic times. So all of these statistics are, once we get the 2022 report on this, are going to be much higher. But 65% of Americans play video games. I think Quebec, last time I checked this, was like 63, 64, so very close. So wrap that in your mind for a second. We often think games are for young people. Well, actually, 65% of people is not people below 18 years old. So this is across all age groups. In fact, the average age of a gamer is 33 years old. We think of this as a thing for kids. It's actually more adults are playing video games than any other age group. In fact, the age group that has the most gamers is 65 and up. They're the ones with the most spare time. What's also interesting is that there's this idea that games are for boys, that it's a male thing, and it very much was in the 80s and 90s as it was starting. But now 46% of gamers are identifying as female. And if you cross-check, age and gender, the single most popular category of gamer, the typical gamer statistically is a 35-year-old female. And that's pretty surprising. And, and the reason for that is that games have evolved as a medium tremendously over the last, 20 years. And it used to be it was just consoles on your TV, but now there's social gaming, there's games on your mobile phone, Candy Crush counts. My grandmother lives in Saskatchewan. She's 96 years old, and she's got 8 different Scrabble games going on with people all over the world at any given time. That counts. And so this idea of games as a digital media, in a digital medium, is really just a metaphor for how we interact and play with one another. But there's also a larger social trend, right? We've been seeing the rise of the board game as well. As board games get more and more sophisticated, more people playing board games in person. And so the idea here is that there is a cultural norm around these activities that starts, with these kids as young as 2 years old, 3 years old. And I'm not just saying video games, but also board games, which have a lot of the similar mechanics. So I'll move on to a bit more on this. But one last statistic here to think about is By the time a child has reached the age of 21, they'll have played 10,000 hours of games. 10,000 hours of games is a pretty interesting number. 10,000 hours is just about equal to the amount of time they'll have spent physically in school through their K-12 career. So while they're going through school, they're also getting a complete parallel experience that it exists for as much time in their day, in their week, as schooling. 10,000 hours is also the amount of time it takes to master something. So they say, hey, if you want to master violin, you're going to need to pick it up, start from scratch, practice 10,000 hours, and then you'll be a master at violin. And that's true for a lot of other skills, this kind of round figure. And so what are they learning? They're clearly learning something here. Well, there's a lot of things to learn from games. They can learn how to better collaborate. You love or hate it, Fortnite is a really good place to learn how to work with other people. They're learning the value of perseverance. In a game, if you work hard enough, you will win. They're also learning that it's okay to fail and try again. These are important, valuable life lessons that unfortunately aren't being translated into the real world. If you want to know more about this, the skills and all of that, I encourage you to watch a really great TED Talk by Jane McGonigal. I forget the title, but you just type Jane McGonigal TED and you'll get it. And it's all about these specific skill developments in that people are learning through games. So massive. But also bleeding out into the real world. And this is where, just because people are doing a lot of things, I could have a lot of, really strong statistics here, like 100% of Americans sleep every night. And, 51% of sleepers identify as female, and the average age of a sleeper is 35. The average person spends 10,000 hours sleeping by the time they're 21. That doesn't make it culture. What does make it culture is that it's common artifacts that are going beyond the actual medium itself. So I'm back with Fortnite. Why Fortnite? It's a very popular game, a lot of people playing this, but the impact it's had on young people's culture is undeniable. You've probably heard of this dance, the floss. It wasn't invented by Fortnite, but it was massively popularized by Fortnite. And what's fascinating here is that kids who are doing the floss are not doing this to win at Fortnite. They're not even playing Fortnite. What they're doing is learning tropes from the activities that they're doing and bringing them into the real world. And that's really culture. When I was a young person, we would watch MC Hammer videos and try to copy his dance moves. Can't touch this. And that was culture, right? That was dance, that was music, that was video. Now a lot of that is happening through these digital worlds. And in fact, it's bleeding over into the real world in a really powerful way. I don't know if you can see what we're looking at here. This is a completely filled stadium of people watching a guy and lots of other people playing video games. This is a phenomenon called Esports. It's becoming more and more known, but also it's still very surprisingly not mainstream for how many people are partaking in this. There are more people in 2020 that partook in esports than any other professional sport. And these are stats from 2019, rather. So pre-pandemic was already 600,000 people watching esports worldwide versus, the professional football, if you exclude the Super Bowl, is only 80,000 people. Tennis has way less of an audience than esports. And so although this may seem weird, like, why would you go watch somebody play a game? Wouldn't you just play yourself? That's a question I get a lot about this. And the answer to that is, well, why would you watch somebody play football? Why don't you just go play yourself? This is true of any activity we're watching somebody else do. It just so happens that we're interested in what the best players can do and learning from them, just like we're interested in seeing what the best hockey player can do and learning from them. So although this may seem weird, this is happening a lot. In fact, it's happening so much that games are now the biggest cultural medium by revenue source. And I can't stress this enough when I talk about the impact of games on culture. this graph on its own should tell its own story. Don't even need to talk about Mario and esports. If you compare gaming to any other cultural medium, not only does it dwarf it, it dwarfs all of the other ones combined. Even categories like streaming, which are, billion-dollar industries, Netflix and HBO and Disney, are only a fraction of what gaming is doing. Now, the gap here on the right is really interesting as a case in point. But what's more interesting is the impact on this generation. Because look when that line started surpassing film. It's all the way back in 2005. And 2005 happens to be when most of these Gen Z kids started being born, right around the 2000s. So for the entirety of their life, games have been the predominant cultural medium. This is not a new trend. This is an old trend that is just getting bigger and bigger. And so this is how they've been educated outside of school. This is where they've learned to collaborate. This is how they've learned to build wins. And this is how they've learned to be successful. So the question then is like, well, what can we learn from that? And how can we bring it into how we're teaching kids, especially in remote settings where, it's already a digital medium. And what's interesting here is that we need to start talking about the fundamentals of why this is happening with games. Like, why are games such a runaway success? Is it really that much better to, play a game than it is to watch a movie? It's better to watch a movie than read a book. Is it better to, listen to music? All of these are just activities that we fill up our free time with. Now, the runaway success of games comes all the way down to how they fulfill the fundamental needs we have as human beings. And so there's deep psychology, and game makers know this. I mean, we work with all kinds of different stakeholders in the video game world here at Classcraft, and they know this, and this is how they're designing games. And so let's take a step back from the gaming and talk a bit about the psychology. At the top of this conversation, we were talking about extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, and the desire for them to be more engaged. What's this engagement culture? And so, we know as educators, there's two types of motivation, and extrinsic motivation is very clear, and it's a lot of what I was talking about, saying, how do we get students to participate in online learning? Let's make it count on their grade, give them points for participation, therefore they will participate. Yes and no. So yes, that works because extrinsic motivation works. It's, doing something to get a desired end state or avoid an aversive one. So, right, I don't want to get a bad grade, so I will participate. I don't want to get a ticket, so I'll drive under, 120 on the highway. These are things that we do not because we want to do them. They're things that we do because we feel like we have to do them. And intrinsic motivation is doing something because you want to. And undeniably, people who play games want to play games. Almost all people who play games do it of their own free will and not for any other reward than their own desire to partake. And so what that means is that games are really, really effective at getting you to want to play them. And we could have a whole other conversation about cyber dependence and, how to be aware of that. But if we apply that for good, that's a huge superpower that we need to think about. Now, the other problem when we think about student engagement is that extrinsic motivation suffers from something called the overjustification effect. And what that is if you take something that somebody is intrinsically motivated to do and add an extrinsic motivator to that, they will lose the intrinsic motivation they had. So in essence, if you put an extrinsic motivator on something that someone wants to do, the extrinsic motivation will replace it. Seminal study on this from in the 70s. This has been well documented, this effect, but super interesting. They had kids and they gave them markers and they just had them, school age kids, first grade, and they have them sitting, and they've got papers, they've got markers, and spontaneously the kids start to draw and color, etc. And they observe this over time. If you just put out the drawing materials, the kids will start to draw and they'll want to do it. And then what they did was give candy to kids who drew. So, hey, if you draw, I'll give you a candy. And of course, that sounds great, right? Because, hey, they already want to draw. Now they get the candy. And what they saw after doing that for a while was once they took away the candy, the kids would not spontaneously draw anymore. And so although they had an intrinsic desire initially to do that, once we put in place an extrinsic motivator, the intrinsic desire disappeared and was replaced. And so where I'm going with this is, when we think about what we've done in education to motivate kids, a lot of what we do is extrinsically motivating them. And unfortunately, what that means is that we become addicted to the extrinsic motivation, right? If we take it away, the kids don't do anything because they've lost their intrinsic motivation. And so as early as we can, we need to be thinking about that. But it's not too late, even if they're older. We just need to create conditions that generate intrinsic motivation. And that's where games come in. So anybody who's heard me give a talk on anything ever has heard this analogy. And this is probably my favorite way to explain this, because golf is such a not normal activity. And let me explain that. If I were to tell you, hey, take this ball, put it in that hole over there, and you didn't know about golf, your reflex would be to do it in the simplest way possible. Pick up the ball, walk over, drop it in the hole. And then I would say, hey, thank you. Now do that 5,000 times. And then you would say, no way, that's work. You've got to pay me. Why would I do that? And then I would say, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you how to do this. So actually, you need to take these clubs. Here's a big bag of wobbly sticks, and you can only hit the ball with those sticks. And it's kind of hard. So you know what? You don't have an infinite amount of shots. Like, you need to count your shots and do this in the least amount possible. Normally, you should do this in like 3 shots. And I'm sorry, but those sweatpants you're wearing, you got to go home and change. But when you come back and you're dressed right, you'll be able to do this. And, I have this meaningless task on which I'm putting arbitrary rules that I'm making up as I go. And in doing that, creating conditions for which lots of people not only want to participate in this, they're willing to pay their money, their own hard-earned money, to do this activity. Now, that's intrinsic motivation. That is people who are of their own free will, taking their time, their energy, their resources to partake in this activity, for which the conditions are completely made up and for which the outcomes are completely pointless, other than the satisfaction that they provide. And so look at what I just did there. I took a meaningless activity and put rules in place that made it meaningful. And when we think about education and we think about distance learning, this is something we should always be trying to do. For learners, the activity of self-educating has become meaningless. It is a way to get to something else. And a lot of that is because we've built in extrinsic motivators, over 15 years by the time they get to higher ed. And so what do we do? How can we learn from this to create conditions that will make them want to partake? And so the answer to this lies, how are games so magical? How is that simple thing that I'm doing of adding these fake rules, so successful? And the answer lies in self-determination theory. And so self-determination theory is the branch of psychology that looks at why we're motivated. It's the winning model around intrinsic motivation. It's been around since the 70s, well before video games were a thing. And what's interesting here is that the theory says we are motivated by situations that allow us to be self-determined. In other words, as human beings, we have a fundamental need to grow, to develop, to become our better selves. It's a very humanistic theory, and this has been demonstrated in so many contexts. Intrinsic motivation in education, and like this is the theory. When we look at how to motivate employees in the workplace, this is the theory. And this is how game designers are thinking about games. How can we make them meaningful? And the answer lies in we are motivated by activities that fulfill fundamental needs. These three needs: the need to feel competent, the need to be able to make decisions, and the need to have social relationships, relatedness with other people. And so games are incredibly good at that, but that's what's happening with golf, right? Competency, that's why I need to count my strokes at golf. That's why I need to count the shots. Why do I have to have the lowest score possible? It's so that I can measure myself against other people and against myself, my own progress. Why is there multiple golf clubs in golf? Like, why not just one stick and that's it? The answer is so that you can make more decisions, giving you a lot of options. That makes it a lot more meaningful because you're in control of the outcome. And why do we have a dress code for golf? It's so that you can identify other golfers. It's all about the relatedness piece. When you go to the clubhouse after, you can see who was golfing, and you can recognize yourself in these other people. And so that's what's happening with golf. That's also what's happening with any other hobby. Like, let me just pick one at random here. Woodworking. Woodworking. I suck at woodworking. If I wanted to start woodworking and what would motivate me? Well, I'm making benches. So my first bench, my criteria for success would be I can sit on it. But by the time I made 300 benches, they're getting better and better, nicer and nicer. I'm changing the design, changing the wood. I can see the progress. I can also make a lot of creative decisions, like what wood is this made out of? Am I going to varnish it? What shape am I going to give it? And those are inherently motivating things. But then if these benches just sit in my garage and nobody ever sees them, much less motivating than if I'm giving them to friends and family, sharing them, taking photos. All the things we do around our hobbies are about connecting to other people. And video games are incredibly good at doing this. And that's the whole secret. They're built to make you feel these things. And that's intentional. It doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, is inventing a sport bad? No, and it's the same thing with games. They're really good at fulfilling these human needs that we have, and that's fantastic. And so if we look at Tetris, what's interesting in Tetris is that it's a very repetitive experience, one of the most played video games in the history of humanity. Why is this motivating? Whenever I talk about Tetris, almost every single person has played this game at least once. And most people are like, I love Tetris. And the reason is because it's a very fulfilling activity because you are progressing. And that's the points in Tetris, right? Compare those to money. You can't spend the points in Tetris. You can't use them. You can't share them. What you can do with those points is measure your own skill level. And we're motivated by situations where we feel like we're very good, where we have competency, or where we're developing competency. We have a lot of feedback to see our own progress. Games are really good at giving you that. The other things games are really good at is giving you lots of opportunities to make decisions. When I play Minecraft, I don't have a bag of clubs. I don't have 15 options. I have an infinite amount of options. Minecraft has no points, no levels. Why is the creative mode so popular? It's because it affords you with an infinite amount of decisions you could make. And if you put yourself in the place of a young person, there aren't that many decisions they can make throughout their school day. For the most part, their school day is very regimented and structured. And that's one of the challenges when they get into distance learning is they don't know how to structure themselves because they've been relying on school to do it. If we give them affordances where they can make decisions, structure their own work as early as possible, they're going to be more motivated, but then they will become more self-directed, self-determined when those crutches are taken away. The final element is relatedness. This is a truism for online games. This is why they're so popular, is because there's community. You can share this with other people. You're experiencing it with other people. And online learning is, for the most part, surprisingly bad at doing this. This is an opportunity where you can create digital community. People who have similar interests are in a class. They care about the same things for the most part, and their experience of virtual learning is extremely individualistic for the most part. So huge missed opportunity here, in my opinion. And so where does this all take us? You know, I went from like, oh my God, we need to train them for the future and the world is changing. And, you know, they're stressed out about that, and there's apathy, and there's this culture of engagement, and, you know, like, here's the playbook on how to do that. What does that mean for us in education? And for us, what that means is that we need to be focusing on teaching them how to be good distance learners. And being good distance learners means that we're also helping them prepare for the future, because a lot of the skills that you need to be self-driven, self-motivated, self-organized in virtual learning are the skills you're going to need to succeed in an ever-changing workplace. And so there's a huge opportunity for distance learning to tackle this head on. Now, what's interesting is that we kind of just expect kids, you know, and young people that are in distance learning scenarios to be good at it. Like we're always surprised, like, oh my God, like they're not logging in, or oh my God, so many people dropped out of this online course. And the truth is, these people have never, ever, ever been taught how to be good distance learners. Like, what does it mean to be a good distance learner? A lot of them, for the most part, learned what it meant to be a good in-person learner. If I take a kid and, you know, put them through, you know, 11 years of school and then put them in an online college course, for a lot of them, you know, with the pandemic, things have changed. They've had a crash course probably for a lot of them. But pre-pandemic, what we were looking at is these kids have never, ever, ever been taught how to do this right. We just expect them to know what to do and how to do it. And so at Classcraft, we've developed a competency framework for teaching kids how to be good distance learners. And we identified 3 skills, and we've identified attached to that different behaviors that we want to see in learners. And you know, Classcraft is a platform that uses the culture, the mechanics of games to reinforce specific behaviors we want to see that lead to skill development. And so so those 3 skills that we developed and that we created behaviors for are A, being an empowered learner. So this is all about autonomy, right? In distance learning, what we're asking learners to do is be more empowered than ever. We're not sitting there next to them telling them what to do every 5 minutes. They need to be able to figure it out, and they need to be able to have the drive and the skills and the knowledge to be able to make those kinds of decisions. You know, and for a kid that's in first grade, you know, that level of skill is like we're asking them to do that. But for a kid that's, you know, in college, the skill level that we're requiring of them is different, but it's still the same skill. We want them to be able to identify what they need to do, identify the pathway to success, identify the triggers they have in themselves that prevent them from taking action, and, you know, develop their own skills to be able to do those things. The second one is being an engaged learner. So not only do we want them to be empowered, be self-directed, we also want them to figure out and understand how to succeed and take actions to succeed. And so that means knowing what to do, how to do it, when to do it, what does success look like, and how do I move towards that? So not just making the decisions to do that, but also having the structure to do that, and have get the feedback that I need to be able to know that I'm engaging. And the third one is building learning community. You know, I think that this is often, skill number 1 here on the left is the one that we, in distance learning try to encourage the most probably. Number 2 is like, okay, now that you're like a little bit more autonomous, here's all the things I want you to do. But number 3 is often left to the wayside. And as I was saying before, missed opportunity. The reality is that an online course is a digital community. It's a digital community of self-selected people who have decided to be interested in a specific topic. And yes, they're all very diverse, but they do have a through line for which we should and could build community on top of it. And that's not just the role of the educator. The students need to know how to do that and what that looks like and be self-motivated to do that. And so we need to teach them how to engage in these scenarios with their peers and how they can contribute to making it a true community, not just being, passive acquirers of knowledge and handing in homework, but actually contributing to helping their peers and helping elevate learning. And so, see where I'm going with this. These map back to the core competencies that we know are important, the core needs that we know are important for self-motivation, right? Empowered learner, that's making decisions. Engaged learner, that's competency. Learning community, relatedness. And so what we need to do is build experiences that map back to this, that afford us to fulfill these needs. But at the same time, we need to be explicit about teaching kids how to engage with that because they have not learned it. And so how do we do that? So here's a crash course in 1 minute on how we do that with Classcraft. Our approach to this is saying, well, let's take the culture, let's take the mechanics, let's take what they already know about games and just apply it to making them better distance learners. So for each competency, we have a framework of behaviors, and these behaviors are behaviors that lead to skill mastery, right? Like being an empowered learner, what's the first step is make a goal and work towards it. Learn from your failures. Being an engaged learner, these are some simple things, but like show up for video lessons and submit your work on time. Very basically participate in online discussions. Now, these types of behaviors can be adapted and changed for your own specific context, what you're trying to accomplish. But the point is these skills are pretty broad and apply to all distance learning scenarios. And we should be giving them feedback when they do them. When a student, we should tell them, like, you need to make a work goal for the week and demonstrate progress throughout the week. And if you do that, I need to give you feedback that you're doing the right thing. Like, good job, this is what I'm looking for. So we can't ignore the signs either. As educators, we need to act on them with intention, because that's how we build competency, right? We're telling them, hey, you're progressing, good job, giving you lots of options for deciding how you're going to do your work. And that's fantastic, that's motivating, but I need to give you meaningful feedback about your progress as you're doing that. And ideally, I need you to do that with other people. And so we need to be explicit about that, and we need to reinforce it. In Classcraft, the way we do that is, we have a dashboard and students have avatars and they level up. So it's all about, taking everything I've been saying about games and applying it to teaching them how to be good distance learners. We can do that with curriculum as well. There's quest maps. But ultimately for them, it's about getting these points, leveling up, getting the feedback, feeling the progress, being on a team. Classcraft is a team-based activity, and ultimately sharing that success with other learners. And so it's all about building relationships with the class, building relationships with other students, and building relationships with the teacher. And then ultimately giving ourselves the tools we need to be able to assess progress on this, right? My slides are choking out here. Here we go. The byproduct of giving feedback in a digital manner as opposed to a verbal manner or a paper-based manner is that we're able to have a lot of data as a byproduct. And so if you're giving feedback, you're leveling up these kids, you're helping them feel like they're progressing, giving them meaningful, culturally relevant, mediums to do that in. The byproduct is you're able to see which students are doing the things, and you can look at a month into the semester and see which ones have been doing those things. Congratulate those ones, and sit with the students that haven't been getting a lot of reinforcement for setting a work plan, that haven't been contributing to the learning community, that haven't been leveling up, in essence, their skills as distance learners. And so we can catch them earlier before they drop out of a class, before they start failing, and say, hey, here are the behaviors that I need to see. Why aren't you doing them? Let's talk about it. How can I help? And in fact, helping them become better by looking at the data. So having this type of a system, and it doesn't have to be Classcraft, but you should be thinking about, how can I level up these kids? How can I create learning experiences that foster intrinsic motivation, just like games? And how can I get the data that I need to help students course correct, help them take a look at themselves, and help me as a teacher identify the challenges that they have? So this stuff really works. This is a study that was done by University of Charlotte, and they did a comparison of, like, in higher ed, having students participate in online forums in exchange for grade points, and then doing the same thing with students, but giving them Classcraft points. And they had 54% participation rate in the class where they were giving grade points. These kids are like, screw that, I'm going to lose 10 points on my report card. I don't care. Like, it's too boring, too much work to participate, versus, doing it with a gamified approach. They saw 97% participation rate. So very powerful impact that you can have in distance learning here, not to mention all kinds of other impacts. So we're coming up on time, and I'm, didn't need the cue here. We're 10 minutes in, so we can jump into Q&A. Thank you for listening, everybody. Really appreciate you taking your Friday morning here with me. It's been
Love
great.
it. I was just about to let you know that that we were going to take questions. So wonderful. Thank you so much. Actually, based on the comments that we have in the chat, it seems like we have a couple of golfers here. And Mr. Lelou wrote that he's never seen his son dance before Fortnite, and now he's a great dancer. So yeah, we do have a couple of questions. First one is Olivier Chevrier. So basically, what's your thought on the fact that video games in education may have the effect of enforcing a play to earn, so like money, rewards, grades, behavior? I'm a little worried we educate kids with a financial culture, motivation being an economical concept, where there are no other kind of motivation that gains, like no honor, no pride, no virtue. I know you're actually leaving a political world based on trust, but it's still, we're actually living, sorry, he wrote leaving, in a political world based on trust, but it's still an important point in our daily life.
I appreciate that. I think that there's poorly made gamification can have that effect. So I think it's a valid concern. But however, I would respond with saying that, points and systems, like, for example, I talked about Tetris. We're talking about pride, for example. Well, Tetris is a really interesting way to think about this, because the points in Tetris, as I said, you can't spend them, you can't use them, you can't earn them, you can't even do anything with them. Like in the Game Boy days, you couldn't even post them online, and still, most popular game of its era. And so it's not about the rewards so much as getting meaningful feedback about your progress. And when we look at education, we're extremely crappy at doing that. For the most part, feedback about your progress is hand in a paper or do an exam, and 2 weeks later, I'll tell you how you did, and then you're going to have another one in a month from now. We're not giving them, relevant, just-in-time, specific feedback about what they're doing. We're doing, summative, much later type of assessment that is not meaningful in terms of a motivational approach. And so, when we think about, Classcraft, for example, what we see is, we had a study that was done in Brazil where they looked at students' behavior, participation rates, et cetera, before Classcraft. Then they implemented Classcraft for 2 months, and then they took it away. And the question was saying, is this extrinsically motivating? If so, they'll stop behaving the way they were. Can we take it away? And actually what they saw was that kids continued to exhibit the same behaviors they had during Classcraft, even when they took it away. Students were participating more, they were collaborating more, they were helping each other out of class with the teammates they'd had, even though the teams were gone. And when I talk about internalizing motivation from the context of games, it's exactly what happened here. saying, yes, you're right. At face value, it looks like games are an extrinsic motivator, but really what they are is an externally designed experience that develops intrinsic motivation, and which is very different from an extrinsic motivator. And so, but you're right. We could imagine things using game-like mechanics, like leaderboards, for example. If leaderboards is your only way to, try to motivate kids, then you're probably going to fall into this trap. You need to have a robust, thoughtful design about motivating different types of learners, but also fulfilling these fundamental needs. So it's not about rewards, it's about competency, relationships, decision making.
Thank you, Shawn. We have a few more questions. So Fabien Griand-Jean, he basically shared a Medium article, and it's entitled "The Tech Industry's War on Kids: How Psychology is Being Used as a Weapon Against Children." And then he asks about free will, and he basically writes, "It's tricky to talk about games like Fortnite without mentioning the engineering behind it. It doesn't seem trivial. What do you think of its impact on education?"
I think that's a really good point. I'm not saying we should use Fortnite in education. And in fact, there's a lot of things that are problematic with experiences like Fortnite, specifically around, the impact that it's having socially. What I am saying is we can learn a lot from these experiences and build stuff for good in education. There's a reason Fortnite is so popular and is a massive business. It's because they've cracked the psychological aspects there. We should definitely learn from that and then apply that to the type of outcomes we want to see in education. Now, Fortnite is an interesting beast on its own because it's evolving well beyond being a game. Nowadays, most people who play Fortnite aren't even going into the battle royale. They're just going hanging out. There's like concerts in Fortnite, Ariana Grande playing on Fortnite. The whole strategy for Fortnite specifically is to become, one of the platforms of the metaverse. And so what they're looking at doing is going beyond being a game and being a whole digital world. And so that's a whole other conversation. But I'm, don't think that I'm saying, oh, games are really, in any way, without any oversight or any thought behind it, really good for our kids. What I am saying is they're there and we can't get rid of them, and they're massively dominating our culture. So let's harness that beast. Let's learn what we can from it and apply that to successful education.
Great, thank you. Another question here is from André Loisel. So it's actually two questions. The first one is any incidents on the Herzberg's motivation theory model and his motivators versus hygiene factors. And the second, it's a comment question. So I guess we'd all love to see a Ubisoft helping to deliver extremely immersive games crafted for education. Also, initiatives like Classcraft and NetMath are great examples, but for a teacher with limited technological development possibilities, isn't the board game model a better path for the moment?
That's an interesting, I don't think Ubisoft is, I have no opinion about Ubisoft, but the economics of educational games, like game experiences like Assassin's Creed, just don't work in education right now. These are companies that are making billions on consumer-based products, switching to a school model to, in essence, make 1% of the amount of money they're making in the consumer space. Just doesn't make sense for them. So a lot of what they've done, like Discovery Tours, is a goodwill gesture more than it is a business model for them. So, that I don't see that happening very soon. The market dynamics don't work in that direction right now. It's really expensive to make games, video games, proper video games. Now, the question about board games versus video games is interesting. Absolutely, why not? The truth is, everything I just said about motivation applies to non-digital games, and applies to sports, and it applies to, I was talking about woodworking. It applies to all kinds of hobbies. what we can learn from games is that they're a designed experience, board games included and golfing included. This is a thing where we have created rules to promote intrinsic motivation and define it. Now, school is also a designed experience. It is a place in our classrooms as educators, is a place where we have created rules to have a specific outcome. And unfortunately, 99% of the time, the rules that we've created aren't meant to be motivating. They're meant to control. They're meant to, make the teacher feel safe. They're meant to lead to, content delivery models that are, unfortunately, much like this conference, not super interactive. I'm like aware of the paradox here. But what I encourage us to do isn't say like, oh, go out and use Assassin's Creed in your classroom. What I'm saying is you're in charge of your classroom and of the rules that are created there. And you should be thinking about how to design that in a way that's going to generate meaning and motivation for students. And that can mean radically changing what you're doing, and not from a technological point of view, but from a pedagogical point of view. And that's hard. So why not borrow from people who know how to do it, game makers? And so this isn't about the digital medium. This is about psychology.
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you so much. It's already 10 o'clock, so we've had some great questions. Thank you for this interesting and inspiring presentation, basically on the pedagogical potential of bringing gaming into the classroom to support student engagement, supporting a sense of community. So a couple of reminders for everyone. Let's go and evaluate the workshop. You can click the link in the chat. Also, remember to collect your participation badge on the Cadre 21 platform. And please join the Pecha Kucha. It's at noon today. So if anyone has questions, comments, please share them in the chat. I think that Shawn can still see those, and wishing everyone a beautiful day. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciated this.
Thank you, Shawn. Super interesting.
Thanks.
Very different from the way that people used to teach, 50 years ago with the book and the methodology that was just so rigid, right? It's amazing how we can take the classroom to a whole other level. I love it.
Well, there's a lot that's changing, and I think that we're really focused on the modalities, technology and all of that. And in fact, we should really be focusing on the pedagogy, but more importantly, the opportunities we have from a psychological standpoint to interact and create communities in ways that we couldn't before. I've been thinking about this question for 20 years now, and the truth is that all the knowledge that kids need, they can just learn on Wikipedia. So what's the value of school? And ultimately, it's all about the experience and the community that is possible in school. And so we need to focus our thinking away from knowledge delivery to community building.
That's right.
Ultimately,
that's right.
I could talk about this for a long time. But
are you familiar with the community of inquiry framework?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep. And that's the whole point, is that it's not just about the teaching presence, right? The social presence is very important in supporting the learning outcomes. And I like to remind people that online teaching and anything really, gaming, are all pedagogical tools, right? But you have to use the ones that make sense to your pedagogical needs, right? So it's not about everybody going online and learning that way. It's about finding the proper means to deliver a lesson that will meet a specific course objective. So that's it as well. Some people think you have to use technology any way that you can, but if it's not aligned with your pedagogy, with your course objectives, then that there's no point. If it's all done in isolation and then there's no sense of community that is being created, as you said, that's what you get when you go to school, right? That's the whole point. And that's why it's so tricky to build that sense of community online. So it's great that you were able to develop a tool like this. Amazing.
Thanks. I appreciate
Love
that.
it.
I really appreciate it.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good Friday. Have
Thank
a
you.
good rest of conference. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Shawn.
Have
a
a great day.
weekend, everyone.